move for emphasis.
Good evening. This is Charlie Gazik, Chair of the Planning Commission, calling this meeting to order, the meeting of December 28th, 2022, which is a public meeting being recorded and can be viewed later on the city's YouTube channel. Would you join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Mr. City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Marsh.
Present.
Commissioner Quigg appears to be absent. Commissioner Dantzler.
Present.
Commissioner Lowe. Present. Commissioner Van Atta. Present. Commissioner Kennard. Someone, I think, if, yes.
Present.
There you go. Let's see, Chair Gadzik.
Present.
That is 6 present and accounted for.
And if no one has any objection, we will consider Commissioner Quigg, he did call in advance and let us know he wasn't going to be able to make it tonight. The agenda is our next item. Does anyone have any changes or amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll consider that approved. The minutes of October 26th are next up for approval. Does anybody have any modifications to those minutes as they were sent to you? Okay, nobody is indicating objection, so we will consider those approved as well. That brings us to the public comment period. We will open that now. There is no one here in City Hall other than the commissioners and staff. Is there anyone online who would like to make a comment? No, nobody's online. So with that, we'll close the public comment period and give the commissioners an opportunity to comment. I'll just open it to the floor. Any commissioner who would like to make a comment, go ahead.
I'd like to wish you all a Happy New Year.
All right, we're all business tonight. That brings us to reports. The chair has a brief report. A couple of weeks ago, there was a next door conversation on the subject of our food truck ordinance. Actually, it wasn't about the ordinance itself. It was about why don't we have Tuscan pizza there anymore. And I joined in on the conversation. There were people wondering, why, and then some people said, well, the city kicked them out, and so I explained how that came about and why it came about. There were 18 participants in the conversation. There were 10 who were opposed to the ordinance. There were 2 who supported, not including me. And there were 5 who complained about parking at the Commons. So I just bring that up because it's the first real reaction that we have seen since the ordinance was passed. And it doesn't surprise me. Tuscan pizza was a good pizza, and it was a popular service. And it's a shame that we couldn't find a way for them to stay and have the rules apply evenly to every other food truck that might want to operate in Newcastle. I do want to mention that city staff worked with Tuscan Pizza to try to find them another location where they could operate, but there wasn't another property owner in a zone where that would be allowed that made that opportunity available to Tuscan Pizza, so they have moved on. That concludes my report. Director Hoffman, would you like to make a report?
Thank you, Chair. Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director. Just 2 short verbal updates. for you. The Lee-Bima Development Agreement was approved by the City Council and is signed and is in place, and we're awaiting next steps, which would be the PUD and the hearing examiner public hearing. The second item is that the Parks and Trails Planner is on board and starting December 1st, and has been around the last few weeks. When his name is Davi de la Cruz. He's originally from Los Angeles, has a master's in landscape architecture from UW, and will become a parent and be introduced to you when we start the comprehensive plan work and capital facilities, parks, and trails specifically. So he's not here tonight, but we'll introduce you in January or February when we get started. So those are my only two updates.
Anyone have any questions for Director Hoffman? I have a question for you. I know that this regarding the Lee Development Agreement, I know that one of the concerns that was raised about that was one of the access points to that development is a rather narrow road, and how that would accommodate the traffic. And I know that concurrency is one of the things that is required under our code. Could you tell me how concurrency applies to a situation like that? Because it was my understanding that there will be no improvements to that road, and there's nothing in the current capital plan that would widen that road. So it must either already meet the requirements, the current requirements for the amount of traffic that would be on there, or there must be some other thing that is operating here.
Back on. I can only speak generally for reasons that the development agreement is not the civil review. These issues came up in the public hearing, were discussed by City Council, and the key element that I took away is that when development regulations are applied, they will meet level of service standards and street designs. So I won't speak to the specific segment that you may have in mind. To give the City Council and community an idea of what will take place in connectivity and transportation, there is a site plan in the development agreement that goes down that road. But it's clear the development agreement is not that tool. It has certain elements and flexibilities to give certainty so that when they go pursue cleanup of the site with Department of Ecology, they have zoning and density and the other criteria in place. At that point, after the master plan and development applications are pursued and applied for, those criteria will be applied to the design. They will meet street standards. They will meet concurrency to the extent that they're required to. I can't speak tonight on the individual details of what they propose or will propose, other than to say they will achieve concurrency as part of that review.
Thank you.
So I know that the review will be for the actual development there that's been proposed and that the development agreement is for. I guess I just want to make sure I understand. So 136th is not part of that development, but I'll tell you from personal experience and living in that area that road is in abysmal shape. The paving is in terrible shape. I think it's dangerously narrow and curvy in places. And I guess I'm wondering if the review will be limited to just the development site, or if it will include those roads that are adjacent to the development site.
Normally, we'd be advanced enough that we would have the project designed. We wouldn't be back at the development stage, and it would be appropriate for staff to give detail. We're not there yet. So I'm not precluding detail, but to the extent of what we know and is in place, for all we know, there will never be a project there. this is a development agreement that lasts a set period of time. We have an understanding they're going to pursue it and clean up the site. But we're not there yet. So when we are, as part of that discussion that's already taken place at City Council, there were 1 or 2 projects on the city's CIP list for those situations. Now a project's being proposed on the private property that involves those road segments. They will be responsible for the project's proportion of those improvements to city standards as part of that review. What remains is the community's obligation. And so we don't have the detail of what that balance or divide is, but we know that they will provide the infrastructure and improvements specific to their project.
So it sounds like the review then isn't limited to the 4 corners of the development site. That's what it sounds like.
Plus access trail
Plus
down to,
access.
yeah, exactly.
Great, thanks. Perfect.
So our first general business item tonight is an update on the comprehensive plan from Director Hoffman.
A few things to report. We had a lengthy discussion about what this process is required to be and what it will be. In your packet materials, you'll see that in December, the City Council took a step to select SCJ Alliance, and their RFP is in the packet for you to review and get started. The council's motion also directed the city manager to negotiate a contract with SCJ. So that was beginning of December. With the holidays, we began that conversation this week, aiming towards council review of the contract based on a recommendation by the city manager. We've exchanged scopes. You have the scope that they proposed in your packet. We have the scopes for the Commerce Grant. We know what we're trying to achieve. Now we need a draft contract that reflects all of that work. My hope is the first 2 weeks of January, we have that for council consideration, and that they are underway. To stick with their expectations, it will look a lot like the timeline that's in your materials. Advanced a little bit because November, December are gone. But that said, one of their first steps, and it's never too soon to prepare, is going to be putting them in touch with key community members. I don't want to say stakeholders because that implies council members, planning commission, and formal, day-to-day staff. What their intent is to start the process talking to a spectrum of community members, developers, citizens, people involved in housing, transit, librarian, and get a feel for what I'll summarize as what do they want out of the process or issues with the community, to get a feel for the specifics as they dive in. From our perspective, while they're preparing that, we are doing the more formal track, preparing the public outreach and engagement, which does include City Council, Planning Commission, and we'll call them the regulars. And that'll be formalized. There's steps in there. The first 6 months are highly pointed towards public outreach and engagement. While they're doing that, they are looking at our existing policies and formulating alternatives while they're collecting issues. So that kind of describes that first few months. What our intent is to have this item, since it's on the work plan, part of your regular meetings from here on out. There are certain elements we don't need to wait for. Awareness of what the comprehensive plan is, awareness of Vision 2050, things like that we can get started with in January. And then the formal steps under the contract will start taking place in February. We imagine using the full 2-year period available to us, and with the aim of being fully adopted by December 2024. So we have time. We don't need to extend it if it's not needed, but we want to make it available and have a thorough process. The 2 grants that we got from Commerce that we talked about, I think in concept at the last meeting, are in hand. Our intent is to pay for this effort in essence with grant money. There are elements that we won't be able to if we have, for instance, alternatives that require additional SEPA review. We have resources for that, but it would not be assumed to be part of the contract. We won't know until we reach that point of what we're dealing with policy-wise. So we have the flexibility, we have the certainty. It's going to be a long effort and a commitment to be as inclusive and participatory as possible. We'll have more for you. You have a joint, the next item is the joint city council work session. We'll have more for you at the second meeting in January. That'll be separate from the SCJ contract, but we imagine in some way we'll get started in this group at that point.
Any questions?
Pretty straightforward.
Okay, let's move to the next item of our general business, which is the 2023 Planning Commission Work Plan.
Hi, well, so it looks like the fonts got changed a lot. Should have done it as a PDF. Okay, well, we'll muddle through this together. Let's see here, work plan. This is a draft, let's build it together. So tonight, this is a conversation before we go to we are planning commission before we go to city council next week. Just wanted to talk about logistics a little bit and then make sure that we have in the resolution that everything is listed correctly. We didn't miss anything from our last conversation back in October. So first thing is that we'll be attending in person. In February, everybody was on Zoom, but we'll be attending in person this time. It starts at 6 p.m. And in February, when this joint meeting happened, Director Osgathorpe did an introduction, and then Planner Vandeweghe gave a presentation on each item. It's a little different this time because our big item is the comp plan. And then we're kind of folding in items from 2022 into 2023. So the first question is, do you want staff to present again, or would you, as commissioners, like to present the work plan to council?
I don't see anybody raising their hand.
Okay, well, we can do it the same way, absolutely. I'll just encourage you to chime in as you need to. It was Mayor Newing. If you want to see the video from last time, let me know because it's not posted online right now. But Mayor Newing made it very informal, first name basis, so it seemed like it was pretty nice meeting, as meeting goes.
Chair Getzik, if I may, it might be helpful, and I apologize, Aaron, for interrupting your flow with this, to just say a couple of words about logistically, physically, what this meeting is going to look like, because you have not had a joint meeting with City Council since we have been back meeting in person, and we have this new video system. So it's not going to look like anything any of us has ever done before. Council will be seated at the dais, and to the extent possible, we will have commissioners also seated on these flanks on either side. And we can pull up an extra chair if we need to accommodate everyone getting into a microphone to be able to be heard when they're speaking, because everyone will need to speak into a microphone. Otherwise, people who are watching the stream cannot hear you at all. What we will not be doing is we won't be setting up tables in the middle of the room and sitting around a big square. The microphone has not been as helpful there in the center of the room, and it doesn't really work in conjunction with our videography and the angles that we have for the lights. So, so all of that is to say that to the extent that staff is participating, they will probably be sitting in the front row, and when it's time to present, coming and standing at the podium to provide anything at that point. Just to sort of give you a feel for what that's going to look like and feel like. Sorry for the interruption. Thank you.
Thanks for that explanation. That's helpful.
Yeah. All right, it also gave me time to update the font so you could read it. Okay, so these are the items that were left over from this year with all of our staff changes. The PUD ordinance, we decided to defer till a future year. Small cells, wireless code, community design conversation, LID development standards, multifamily housing ordinance, live work ordinance, and any docketing requests that are policy-based, we're looking at moving those towards next year in the 2023 work plan. Those that are in blue here are those items that can be folded into part of the comp plan process. So the LID, the multifamily, live work, and then those policy docketing items. Any thoughts or changes on those? Nope. Okay. So then this is what the work plan looks like. Quarter one, staff's assumption was that we would be starting so heavy with the comp plan, there really wouldn't be time to work on other items, especially because we're also working on a housing grant at the same time, and that has a really short time frame. Then in quarter two, we would get started, along with the comp plan update, the small cells ordinance that we've delayed for 2 years now, so we really need to work on that. Then in the third quarter, we could start that community design conversation and bring a housekeeping amendment, everybody's favorite. And then in Q4, that's just going to be wrap up and continuation of the comp plan, which will last into 24. Were there any changes or clarifications?
I would like to talk about the idea of folding in the community design conversation also into the comprehensive plan review. I was looking through the downtown plan, and it looked like there was already some architectural element design that are a part of our plan, and was curious about why we wouldn't just fold that into the bigger process.
So Director, not Osgood, Director Mark Hoffman and I were talking earlier, and I asked the same question, and the idea is that there's not very much that you can do on that specific item, and Mark, if you want to take over for me, you can. But policy-wise, we can state something.
I guess the way to put it is yes, but to what level? Policy, objectives, goals, mission, absolutely. That's what the comprehensive plan is. But what it's not is a relook at the downtown plan. You can have that conversation, talk about community design. You have absolute flexibility to approach any of those issues, but the comprehensive plan is policy. The downtown plan is implementation. So an offshoot could be policy change, new policy, keeping what's there in support of having a downtown design, but then doing the specific design work separate as an action item. So it's yes and no. Can you dive into it and talk about it? Absolutely yes. Same process. But it's primarily policy.
And then is there, as far as the downtown plan goes, is there another schedule that's reviewed at some point, or?
Well, being new, I would say I don't know. But knowing that you have two versions of it, I believe almost 20 years apart, second one being fairly recently, I would assume there's no built-in mechanism to do it again in 2 years. But one of the offshoots of having that conversation with the comprehensive plan is it's a relook at what the city needs, or who, the character of the city. So it can be revisited and communicated, but it wouldn't in itself replace or take away the downtown plan. If the consensus is that it's not working or it's wrong, there's always the opportunity to do that work right after. And I can't speak to what the community and council's or even commission's appetite to revisit that plan this soon. In essence, it hasn't been implemented.
I would concur that I'm not aware of any timetable for revisiting the downtown plan, but the downtown plan was formulated based on public input from a point in time, reflecting public attitudes towards density and development. And in the time since we passed the downtown plan, those attitudes could have changed. People, for example, there was, I'd say there was a feeling among the council and the commission, based on the input we got, that Newcastle favored a denser downtown if it were ever to be redeveloped. Well, since then, there's been a whole bunch of redevelopment that's added density, and perhaps people's opinions have changed. Do they like the direction it went, and do they want to keep on that direction? Then maybe the plan would stay pretty much the way it is. But if they don't like that direction, then maybe there would be some changes to the downtown plan that would reflect whatever that change is that we detect from the public participation.
Ask a question? I'm just not sure I totally get the difference between the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan. Like somebody who came in to develop the QFC side of town, I assume it would go against the comprehensive plan, but how does that work?
It's a long conversation about degree and purpose. The comprehensive plan is a long-term comprehensive vision and mission for the city. It's primarily a policy document. In some states, it's merely a guide. In Washington, it carries a little bit more weight.
Okay.
Development, such as you mentioned, has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and all of its elements. Sometimes they conflict, but it's that high-level policy that requires conformance. What is not are the specifics. It's not the individual design guidelines, setbacks. And so you get these varying degrees all the way down to municipal code, which is very specific. Those are development regulations that are consistent with the policies in the comprehensive plan. The downtown master plan exists somewhere in between, where it takes all of the policies, has to be consistent with what's trying to be achieved in the comprehensive plan, but then site-specific or area-specific applies guidelines, design criteria, sometimes different processes, and applies it to that territory. But even at that level, it's like a specific plan or master plan. Even at that level, it's still not development code, setbacks, that kind of thing. So it's that spectrum, and the downtown plan lies somewhere in between. The key is, from top to bottom, all of it has to be substantially consistent and in conformance. But they have primary different purposes.
Commissioner Marsh? Vice Chair Kennard?
I'd just like to paraphrase what I understand the community design conversation is, and just get affirmation that I'm right or wrong. The downtown business plan sets out, say, the form of a building. It's got to be 2 stories, it's got to, face the street, got to have some windows and that kind of stuff. But it doesn't describe anything in terms of its actual design. And that's what the community design conversation was to specify kinds of materials that would be acceptable. And that today, developer doesn't have to adhere to any of that because there are no design criteria. Simply, it has to meet this kind of a big block form. Have I got that right? Am I?
Yes. And so it may be that in this occasion over the next year, you're talking about community design. which is a comprehensive plan policy level. Even in the conversation, getting into colors, materials, and what materials work in the community. But what physically happens from collecting all that conversation and comment and policy is that the policy is captured in the comprehensive plan. The action items could then deal with that issue and say, city shall look at, et cetera, the specific things that you mentioned. So if, for instance, if you're talking comprehensive plan, one of the things that is determined to be missing is the lack of detail on colors, materials, character, form-based code, things like that. The action items could call for specific work done as a result of the comprehensive plan put in place. Then it's just a matter of resources, staff having the hands to do it, primary goal being done with the comprehensive plan update, being consistent with Olympia, Vision 2050, countywide planning policies, capturing or re-looking at the community character, then working on the individual things that come out of it.
Yeah.
Mr. Densler?
If I could just say more about where my head's at with this, is that when I have heard about, the comprehensive plan review that we're doing this year, the year feels really full. I mean, from what I'm understanding, we're talking about housing, we're talking about transit, we're talking about county and regional things. So when I see this community design conversation, it feels sort of misplaced to me just looking at it. I might be incorrect. Maybe it's a great time to have a really broad conversation about design and then see if it funnels through to comprehensive plan. But I think just on a fresh read over the last couple of days, I'm like, oh my gosh, does that fit into what we're doing? Is this the right time to have the conversation? So that's where I'm coming from. It doesn't feel like the right time to me, just.
If I could make a suggestion, in keeping with what I've already conveyed, we could stay out of the weeds. We could stay out of the design criteria, because that could take a year, that could take 2 years, or it could never end. But if we stay out of the specifics, but have the conversation around it to make sure the policy's captured and what the roadmap is to go forward, what's missing, leave it flexible and open so that you have the ability to decide with the community what elements are missing, what is needed. Then staff could work with you, show you the policies that are already in the comprehensive plan, and have conversations about, are they adequate? Are they wrong? Are they outdated? Or even suggest examples of policies from other cities and locations that could work here, that could be captured and get you that policy level in the comp plan. So that conversation is already going to happen. But I think you're right to then take it and say, let's start working on those specific things. That could consume all your meetings for a year easily to get it right. And so that, I would say, that portion should come after.
Yeah, so I want to follow up with Mark just mentioned. I was also wondering, when we have this community design conversation on the work plan, what is the checkbox when we say we done this? We can say this item on the work plan is done. Is it like, is there a deliverable, or we just had a conversation, then we move on, or kind of a scope, define the scope? Do we have, for the work plan, do we have, criteria when we can say this is done?
So when I was watching the February meeting and getting up to date on this particular item, the first part of the conversation was really to have a conversation. Do we have enough? And then an eventual deliverable could be coming up with sort of what's the word I'm looking for? A vision for what is our identity. And so in that conversation, council members and commission members were talking about what kind of monuments might we want. The entryway monuments were brought up, which was something that I think was suggested a long time ago. So it was really going to the minutia. So the first part of it would be determining if we want this. Does the city want an identity like Leavenworth has, right? Like that level of architectural, or something in between what we have now and Leavenworth. Like, so, and if we do, yes, we move on to having to update our development code. And if we don't, then we're fine where we are. So I suppose the deliverable would be a report back on what we find from community outreach and then moving on from there.
Any other questions? Commissioner Densler.
Well, I'm just looking at the downtown plan, and I'm seeing like architectural details. I'm not quite understanding what more a design conversation would be about. Am I missing something? Is this something that cities typically do, have a community design conversation?
I always have, yeah.
Okay. It's a conversation, to Maggie's point. There's not necessarily a deliverable like a downtown plan. It's just a broader conversation.
Yeah, and to honor your question, I think you'll be the ones that decide that you've had that conversation. You know, to the extent that you frame the policy, look at what's already in the comprehensive plan, make recommendations on what's missing, contain those missing items, you'll be the arbiters of have you achieved what you've heard from the public stakeholders in the past, not necessarily from staff. I think our task is to stay out of the way and listen and then assist you, and then the planning commission makes a recommendation. You could see it as leaving that item on your work plan, form a consensus at the correct time that you've had that conversation and that what policy is in place is satisfactory or is mostly satisfactory, but add this, or is entirely wrong. And that you, in your recommendation, frame that consensus and tell the city council what you find.
Vice Chair Kennard.
Maybe I can help provide a little context. In my prior life, I was a real estate manager for REI. And when we went to develop the Seattle flagship store for REI, Seattle had no design guidelines. We could build whatever we wanted within the envelope that we were allowed to build. Allowed for some creativity, some unusual materials, and we think it turned out real well. When we went to the city of Redmond to open the REI store there, they had a design review board. And we had to go before them, I think 3 or 4 months, back and forth. It had to be brick, okay, and it had to be a specific pattern of brick. So that's the difference in two cities' approach to design. And that's the conversation we could have here about how specific do we want to be or how general. And then I think this conversation came about, I can't remember the development that's going to take place next to the library, but there was some disappointment about the form of that I heard from people, that it didn't quite fit what they thought our image should be. And that's the conversation I think we're going to have, is what should it look like? Because it checked all the other boxes, but it still didn't meet some of the community's expectation, I think.
We're going to, Commissioner Marsh.
So maybe not to state the obvious, but I think if this is an item that we're going to keep and have as part of our plan, and not saying I think we should or shouldn't, but I think if we do, I think we will all need to, as individual members of the commission, spend a little bit of energy ensuring we're self-disciplined, because my guess is that we all have somewhat different visions for what we think is appropriate. We probably all have heard a million different things about what the community members would like. And I do think that there's a danger in a discussion like this starting to pigpile some of this, right? And you do end up going, to mix metaphors, you end up going down all these different rabbit holes. You know, I think we do need to, like I said, exercise some discipline and be willing to say, okay, well, we'll have a meeting or two. And at the end of that, we really need to decide as a group, okay, given the fact that we're in the middle of the comp plan review, can we continue to put our time, our resources into this? Because I do think that there's a real danger here. And I think that there's a real danger, and as likely as anybody else to say, well, I'd like it this way, or I can see it this way. And these conversations will spin, I fear. So I'm not saying that that's a reason not to have that discussion, but I do think if we're going to align the timing with the comp plan update, we really need to be clear about what we want to do ahead of time.
So it could be that the timing with the comp plan is actually quite fortuitous because of the huge public participation element, which could be asking people about design, would give us the kind of input we need, so it's not just 7 people saying, I like wood or I like brick, but it's getting a sense from the community as, do we need anything? And if we do, what would you like? And we'll have a chance, we'll have input, I believe, into that public participation, the content of what we're going to elicit, what our consultants are going to elicit, and that would be a good time for us to share that.
Then this may be an ideal venue for that. You know, we'll have other opportunities outside of City Hall to increase participation. Some citizens may not want to come here, or may need to remain anonymous or be on neutral ground, and so we have those available. This is a regular occasion, recorded and known that you're working on this high-level policy. So your meetings are unique to be able to elicit that comment. And Paul's raising his hand, but one more tool, SCJ Alliance has urban design specialists as part of the team. When that conversation takes place, they know the tools, they know the terms. I'm by no means an urban design specialist. But as we focus on process, we will have that resource here to help with that conversation, hear public comment, gather public comment, and try and forge that policy with you so that you're, as part of this effort, can satisfy as a group that particular work item.
I know one of the commissioners had their hand up, but let's hear from Clerk White first.
Again, apologies for the interruption. I just was wondering, for the benefit of the public who may not be intimately familiar with the downtown plan, or some of the design issues that you're discussing, would it be helpful to note how many and which developments have actually been built using the standards of the downtown plan?
The same question was asked at the last meeting in February, the joint meeting, and it's none. Actually, the Waterline condos is the first that will be built with our standards, so.
Commissioner Etzler.
I just want to say that thank you for everyone for entertaining the topic that I brought up, and I learned a lot, and I would be okay with leaving it in the work plan, with some parameters, and especially if the downtown plan is a part of the conversation, it seems applicable.
Director Hoffman, was there more or Senior Planner Fitzgibbons, was there more that you wanted to say as part of this agenda item?
I think I just have a question if we want to move the community design conversation up to Q2, because our community outreach will start so early. And it's really going to be I feel like it's going to be part of that
That actually may be an opportunity. Public outreach, if you focus that being, the first half of 2023, extensive outreach, elicit comment. In the background, they are looking at existing policies. They're, they participated in the downtown plan. And what they're also doing is preparing alternatives and preparing for that community discussion about what the amendments are. Some of that is development code, some of that is master plan, but it's definitely hearing as they're working. And if we move this item to the second quarter, you could have that conversation at the same time you're getting that public input, instead of leaving it in the third quarter, which is still doable, but then you're not drafting policy until that third or fourth quarter of the year, late in the commission's portion. So by moving it up, having the conversation in the second quarter may be an advantage.
As long as the conversation happens after we receive the public input, I think that would be fine. I don't know if a survey was part of the work plan. There was a survey during the downtown plan. But for example, if there is a survey, having some questions on there would really help inform the conversation when we have it.
And as we look at scopes and first steps, would it be useful to frame that with the consultant that January, February, March, maximize awareness, focus on comment, do your prep work. April, May, June, have that conversation, be specific to the design guidelines and front load it. And I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, I see an advantage to do what you just said. And they have the staff bandwidth to focus on it. So I'm not worried that the three of us will be sidetracked or that we can't address it. They have the staff and it's in the contract at that point. Then they just have to work with you and you direct them as to what you need in that time period, if that works for you.
I'm not sure if I understand what Director Hoffman is proposing. Is anybody else puzzled?
Well, not having been here, and I've heard your comments about the waterline condos, so I'm not going to pick on any individual project. There was a process, master plans in place that largely hasn't been implemented. If you're getting feedback, especially in the first quarter, that, hey, wow, the design was wrong. Yes, it was a process, but they got it wrong. You can direct the conversation in the second quarter for this work item with SCJ and have that conversation and use the public input that you're getting January, February, March, real time. The advantage to them is they can start preparing policy materials right then and not wait for that issue in the third quarter only to find out, wow, there's a lot of work that has to be done on design guideline.
Yeah, as long as we get the public input before the conversation, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're suggesting, yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
good.
Earlier in the process. Because then if there is a problem, they can address it. And I'm not a good judge on whether there's an issue or whether the master plan and design guidelines are spot on. So I'm not making a value judgment. But in this case, if you had an inclination earlier is good, then let's do that. The bigger issues, the more you front load the bigger issues, whatever they will be, and go from broad to narrow, the better this process will be. If in your 11th hour you're considering a draft comp plan and you as a group decide, wow, based on input, design guidelines are horrific, we better have a conversation. In that sense, we're starting over.
So right now, the work plan has the community design conversation in the second quarter. So it seems like it's in the right place if we're going to get the public input in the first quarter.
We can do that. I'm looking at the clerk because the packet for January 3rd is already out as of December 13th prepared. But there's the ability in that conversation in the joint meeting to verbally recommend a change. So I'd like to keep with that verbal aspect as opposed to changing materials.
So the clerk's recommendation is that if you want to propose a different timeline for the work plan on January 3, decide to do it now, and you and I will work tonight on revising all the materials, any that need to be revised to reflect that. Because that way, that's the highest amount of transparency for all of you, for the council members, and for the public on what the actual schedule is that you are proposing to do.
But are we actually proposing a change? What we see now is the design conversation is in Q2. Isn't that what we just said was? Oh, you made that change. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
I just wanted to say that I do like this earlier time frame because it also allows us to look at design in the context of, you know, the other priorities like housing and transit. It's when you talk about feasibility and budget, you know, it's nice to have it all together.
That's spot on. You know, transportation, if you're going to relook at the design, all those other elements relate to it. Transportation, traffic, it's all related. So it'd be well placed to bring early. Is that the consensus to make that one change to bring that item to the second quarter?
I see all heads are nodding yes.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question of the clerk? Is there flexibility in that meeting and conversation with council to make amendments before they then act on it on their regular agenda?
No.
Okay.
Here's why. We are not planning to take public comment at the special meeting where you all will be huddled or together talking with council about the plan. And right now, adoption of the work plan is on the consent agenda. So under neither of those circumstances would any final action or amendment be appropriate. However, if you want council to pull it from consent and make it a general business item in order to make an amendment, I just think it's cleaner if you all decide now what you want to propose with amendment, and I will put a revision into the agenda packet tonight. And then everyone knows what is being discussed on the 3rd and what's on consent for adoption. Because the alternatives are more complicated than just that.
And it's a simple change. It's not, you know, substantive. So I think we can achieve it tonight if that's your desire.
Is it the only one?
Yes.
Actually,
Sure, because we have all night.
I have a question of the clerk as well. Do we need a formal recommendation tonight then on this item? I believe we do.
Here's what I think I just heard. The chair can tell me if I'm mistaken, that he has asked for unanimous consent to make the amendment to make that particular item the community, say what it was again, the community design standards, to make that an item for Q2. And no one objected. So if anyone wants to object to that, this would be the time to do so.
So you are correct, City Clerk White.
Well, that concludes staff's presentation and I think the conversation. So the last thing we had on here was an action, but it sounds like that's where I'm confused. We need a recommendation, right?
So it would be in order, Chair Gadzik, to take a motion now to make the amended proposal the one you want to propose to the council for adoption. I think you have it written down, don't you, Erin?
Yeah, it's in the packet on page 36 of 38. Just to clarify though, it says in the packet, it says as presented, and it would be as amended.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 223-924, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Newcastle, Washington, approving the 2023 work plan for the Newcastle Planning Commission.
I would actually,
With the amendment that the community design conversation be moved to Q2.
second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion passes unanimously. We are now at our second public comment period. Council chambers are still empty except for staff and the commission. Has anybody joined the online conversation?
And they have not.
And we will, I guess I will formally open the public comment period and then formally close the public comment period. Which brings us to our planning calendar. We have our next meeting on January 3rd, a special meeting which I believe starts at 5 o'clock, but I'm going to look to someone who, 6, starts at 6 o'clock, the joint meeting with the city council. And then we have our regular meeting on Wednesday, January 25th at 6 o'clock as well. That concludes our agenda. So, yes, Vice Chair Kennard.
So the form of this meeting will be as you described, but then a part of the function is to sort of introduce us as planning commissioners to the council, a little bit of a personal biography, if you will, short, but.
What I anticipate is that there will be some sort of short introduction by the mayor, followed by sort of a round robin form of self-introduction, council members, commissioners, before we dive into the subject of the work plan itself. And that meeting can last from 6 o'clock right up until 7 o'clock.
At 7 o'clock, would it be customary for us to remain in our places, or will we be giving up our seats so that staff can assume those positions and we would then either take places in the audience or leave?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Chair Gadzik. I would recommend that upon adjournment of the joint meeting, that you might move to the audience for exactly that purpose, so that the city manager and the city attorney and so on can take those spots. I forgot to mention earlier that because this is the spot from which I have to run all the videography, this is one less spot that a commissioner can take up. So that's another consideration. So yes, I think you kind of move, and then if you wanted to stay for all or part of the council meeting, you're of course welcome to do so. But I don't think there's an expectation that you would do so. Just so you know.
All right. With that final comment, I will declare the meeting adjourned.